Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar regarding Powerproject BIM. My name is Ben Taunt, and I'll be spending the next 30 minutes talking you through the more advanced features of this software solution. So once we have our introductions over and done with, I'll be moving on to recap some of the principles of the Powerproject BIM solution. Don't worry, we're only spending 30 seconds or so on that point, before getting our hands dirty once more with a demonstration of the more advanced features that sit within the product. I'll finish up with some comments on the next steps you might want to take, and there will be an opportunity for questions towards the end of the session. Just a reminder, this is part 2 of a part 1 webinar series. So many of you joined me yesterday morning when we covered the initial principles of 4D scheduling, the benefits of why you might want to consider 4D scheduling, and then how you might want to start to achieve that using the core functions and concept of Powerproject BIM. So if you missed that webinar, there is a recording available of it to allow you to watch it back at a later date. So if you contact us, we'll send you the recording to yesterday's session. Or we do also run them about every 6 weeks, so you can revisit the website and log on and watch it again in the future. In terms of housekeeping, everyone's microphone is muted. If you want to communicate with me, please do tap a question into the GoToWebinar control panel. That'll pop up on my screen and I'll try to respond to them when I can. You can also minimize that window off to the side using the orange button if it's taking up too much of your screen space. The webinar is also being recorded, just like yesterday morning's one. You will automatically receive an email with luck from the GoToWebinar system later today, and that will include a link to allow you to watch back that webinar. And you can also forward that to colleagues and allow them also to log in and listen to everything that I've said today and everything that I've shown on screen. So we talked yesterday about the concept of Powerproject BIM. Our philosophy being to produce a 4D planning solution that can be within the reach of any planner. Our concept is that we can allow you to add in an extra module to Powerproject, so it's embedded within the standard Powerproject software, and add that 4D capability into the Powerproject solution. That's achieved by paying us a small fee to add on the bolt-on module to Powerproject and pull in that 3D model and show it alongside the Gantt chart. Once you've pulled a 3D model into the product and you can show it, great for visualization purposes, of course, but there's then a few steps to take to link that model up to the activity. So to associate what task in the Gantt chart is associated to which part of the model. So yesterday we went through the different techniques that exist for achieving that, both by using a standard drag and drop methodology, but also by using powerful searches to find things. The end game being to press play and to allow us to simulate the model and show it evolving over time using a variety of different dates, be that planned or also the actual dates, by using the different baselines that exist in Powerproject. And then we covered at the very end how we can start to share that with other people. A few comments that came up. We use building. We use a lot of buildings in our demonstrations. We show things arriving on screen because that's really the most simplistic way of representing it. But this whole philosophy doesn't just apply to a building site, a new build in a greenfield environment. There's no reason why this can't be equally applicable to an infrastructure project. I've actually got one of those on the screen I might show later on, a road, bridge. And it can also apply to deconstruction activities where you have things disappearing from screen at set times rather than purely arriving on the screen. So whilst the basic covers the concept of building something, this is equally applicable to its other domains. And there's some extra functionality that we are going to talk about in this session that really helps to tease out those points. So for example, today we're going to show multiple models and we're going to move those around. That can include the bringing in of site objects like the mobile crane that you've got there on the screen. We're going to change the color of these different elements. We're going to change how they appear when they arrive, when they're rendered. We're also going to talk about the property information we can extract from that, so the count of the number of piles we need to install or the volume of concrete we need to pour, before then finishing up with an analysis of the visualization techniques. So how can we improve the export of this to make it look more flashy and more realistic? So that's our rough agenda for the demonstration we're going to pile straight on into. And I'm going to start today where we left off yesterday. Just to recap, really, I've got 2 versions of my model on screen because I've got 2 different date lines, 2 different sets of dates, both a project plan and a baseline. And when I hit play on my simulation, we have this red line. You can change that color, don't worry. Sliding across the screen, and you'll see items appearing on the visualizations when we get to that set point. And I can obviously move this around, put this line where I see fit. That then allows you to do the sort of compare of what you said you were going to achieve in the bottom window with what you've actually achieved in the top window. So lots of information already just in that visualization of how things can be shown on screen at a set point. But what I wanted to do is talk about some of the extra data that appears when this comes onto the screen. So I'm going to talk about just the single model for now, so just show that one model on screen. You've got the example here, this task of the pile caps. And that's shown there. If I click on the task, it gets highlighted on the model, and I can see where all the pile caps are. But you'll see that there's some extra columns here. It's telling me a few things about this activity. Within the IFC, that's the model format on the right, there are 78 pile caps. So Powerproject has told you that. You haven't got to get that data from a QS or something like that. Powerproject has counted that there are 78 pile caps associated with that task. It's telling you the combined area and volume of those as well. So I could set up task work rates and formula in Powerproject and use that to give me a suggested duration of how long it might take to install those based on the information that's pulled out from the model. So yesterday we talked about splitting. If I take the example of this roof here, on the model properties pane, that's over on the left-hand side here, Powerproject calculates the area and volume of that roof slab. So as I click on it, you'll see this 1,500 meters of area. If I go through and split that product up and I make it into that checkerboard pattern that we used yesterday, it is contextual in terms of what I'm clicking on. So as I click on one element of that roof, it says 220 meters. If I click on the one next to it, it's a slightly smaller section. If I hold down Control and multi-select, you'll see those values are adding up as I click on the separate sections to it. So this data is available to us as a planner very intuitively, very interactively, in a way that wouldn't be available if you weren't using the Powerproject BIM solution. So that's a really useful thing to make sure we've got. But these models aren't static. They do evolve over time. There may be some design changes, etc. And that might mean that I want to change the model I'm displaying. So in my model properties pane, in the configuration of this, let's say, architectural model, if I look at the properties of that, there is an option to manage the revisions. In effect, I can upload a new version, a revision to that file. So if I get sent from the design team, the architect, a new model, I can overwrite the one I've got by adding in that new version. If I did that, I won't bother for now, but if I was to do that, I would then see on my drop-down list at the top here all the different revisions I've got of these models. I could basically flip between them and show revision 1 and compare and contrast between revision 2. I won't have to relink any item that has remained the same in the product. I will have to relink new items, obviously. If I've used a search to find pile caps, and there are more pile caps in the revised model, because I used a search to find them, Powerproject will add those new pile caps to the same task where the existing ones are linked. And therefore, by looking at the product count, that figure of 78 may go up. So importantly, by using the baseline and encapsulating within the baseline things like the previous count, we can do a comparison between the two models. Now that's all well and good, but we do occasionally have issues where models are given to us with some issues to them. And quite clearly on screen here, I've got a structural model and an architectural model, and they're not aligning themselves to each other. Clearly there's some reasons why that might have occurred. And normally I'd have to go back to whoever created these models to get that fixed. But in Powerproject, I can actually move and manipulate the models around. So I can actually go into that structural model and I can spin it by 90 degrees and I can align it correctly. I can then go back into that tab and physically drag it over so that it aligns itself to the other model. Just need to get the right sort of angles on screen, but I can pick that up and pop it over so the two models align themselves. can zoom in and make sure I get that as accurate as possible. Clearly, it's not as accurate as doing it properly in the design tool, but now I have fixed the problem that occurred with having the two models separate to each other. So now when I run my simulation of this, I will see those different items build on top of each other correctly without having to go back to a designer and get that fixed. Now I can use that same concept of moving models around in order to display extra things within my window. So if I wanted to drop something else into this screen, I can go into my Model Properties tab and you'll see something called Site Objects. I can find other IFC files that I've got saved on my computer. I actually have a folder of Site Objects available to me. Powerproject does ship with all of those ones which start with the word Site Object. So we actually give these to you. You can add your own, of course. But if I wanted to find a tower crane and open it up in my window, I can do that. There's my tower crane. I might want to change the color of it, make it sort of a classic sort of dark red. I may also want to change the size and location of it. So I can scale it down, make it appropriate to the site I'm working on, and follow the same philosophy of sort of picking it up. I need to make sure it sits on the surface though, so rather than floating in the air. And there's that slab just touching the floor there. So I can have that as an activity on my task list. So on my project, I can have a task saying erect tower crane. One thing Powerproject can't do, unfortunately, is actually physically move these cranes around in real time. We don't have an animation package that allows us to move these around. But by linking different tower cranes to different tasks, we can in effect model that functionality. So if I take these two tower cranes, pop them in different positions on my site, and perhaps I want to give each of them a different color. Now I've got this red and yellow tower crane. I could have different activities on my Gantt chart that represent these cranes. So I could have a task here that represents the installation of crane. I could have a task later on in the project plan that represents removal of crane. I need to have the crane linked to both activities. But with this second activity, it is not a implementation task, it's not a build task, it's a removal, deconstruction task. So I can actually say in the timeline simulation profile or in the task type, that this is a removal, or I'm just going to call it a demolition or a dismantle task. So now when my timeline slides across the screen, at the beginning of the project plan, there will be no cranes on site, but when I go back into the project plan, the crane will appear. So I've actually already configured that with these two cranes in this road build. I said I might flash up the road build screen, demo. I have the same activity view here where I'm going to erect the tower cranes at a certain point in time. There's the first one going in, and then the second one at a later date. And those tower cranes do also remove once the road bed's been installed. So I can still use tasks in Powerproject to represent where it is that we're adding and removing these tower cranes. Now you can obviously put in lots of different types of model, not just the tower cranes, but any sort of site object or other thing you want to represent within Powerproject. Now, one thing that was just briefly turned on when I switched to this project plan was the fact that when I press play, I can have the camera to manipulate itself around the screen. This is called a fly pass at the top here. I've got some pre-configured, but I'm actually going to show you how to create a new one from scratch. So I'll just call this the webinar fly pass. And we need to know two different bits of information to create this camera pattern. The first is a point in time, a task, a date time. And I'm going to choose the very first task in my project plan. So I'm going to set at this point in time, I'm going to have the camera at a certain position. And I'm going to start with my viewpoint zoomed all the way out in the distance. So I'm going to set update viewpoint. I'm now going to add a second data point, and that's going to be a task a little bit further on in the plan. Let's say the beginning of that one there. I'm going to set the task and I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. It's actually highlighted in orange so I can see which one I want to look at, and update and use that viewpoint. If I add in a third reference point, let's say we've spun the camera around and that's going to be further on in the project plan. Let's add a third viewpoint, task start, set task, update viewpoint. Those three will do. Clearly you might want to add some more in. But if I implement that fly past, when I now press play, my camera starts all the way out. I'm not touching any of the buttons at this point. The camera's naturally zooming into the second data point I created. So when we hit that task 13, it's then going to spin quite rapidly, I think, all the way around to look at that next viewpoint that I suggested we needed to get to at task 15. So a little bit more playing, you can create this sort of pre-configured direction for the camera. So it spins around and highlights certain points on the project plan at a certain time when it is that you want to highlight that to the items, to the screen. So if I just demonstrate one we prepared earlier, I've got the camera moving constantly in this example. It's going to be zooming in on the different parts of the screen. One thing I will remind you, GoToWebinar actually compresses my screen and sends you a snapshot of it only about once a minute. So you're probably seeing quite a jerky version of these animations. And that is a consequence of using the GoToWebinar system. It's not a consequence of Powerproject BIM. So if you think some of these animations are sort of jerky and disjointed, that is because whilst I see a smooth path when I move the model, you only get sent sort of a picture of it every so often. Okay, what's next on the list? Underneath fly past, naturally you'll see a button called create video. And that's really the next step in this sequence. And that's that I want to take what I'm showing on my screen, but export it for somebody else to look at. So we can export that into an AVI movie file, and I can give that a name, etc. And I can choose whether to show just one window, or if I had my second comparison window up, I can also export that into the video. I can use the file, choose the resolution of the screen. I can use the codec that compresses the video. And there's some extra bits of information I can stick on top as well. As an example, we can add some text, bridge. Let's call that just bridge project. I could have the week numbers shown on screen. And if I was using a comparison window, I could add to that an explanation of the baseline view, etc., etc. There's also image files that I can pop in, both at the beginning, the end, and overlaying the video. What does that mean? It means at the beginning of your video, you could have an image that could be, let's say, a description of what you're about to show. The overlay image is up there constantly during the video, so that's most likely going to be your company logo or your client's company logo. And the outro image, what that means is basically the end captions, what we're going to put at the end of the video. Now, again, in true Blue Peter fashion, I've prepared one of these already. If I run this AVI file, it's of the models I was showing earlier. So you'll see I've got the comparison model on one side, the right-hand side representing the target. That's why it says target at the top of the screen. However, on the left-hand side, I've got the actual progress to date. So I'm animating onto screen two different versions of my timeline. I've dropped the Elikosoft logo on top. I've got week numbering flashing across the top. And down the bottom, I've got the task name. So I can do a comparison of what task is being worked on in these visualizations. So as an AVI file, that's obviously easier to share with people than perhaps the whole project plan. Moving down this list, after create video, I've got create flipbook. And a flipbook is, in effect, a series of image files at a set point in time, a frequency. It's a bit like taking a screenshot when you've programmatically stated you want to take that screenshot. Again, you can choose your image file, you can choose the resolution, but you can also choose when you're taking the screenshot. So this is set to the first Monday of every month. I could have it on the last Wednesday of every month. I could have it every day of the month or every third day of the month. All of these different frequency patterns can be enabled within it. Again, I can choose to add the annotations. But what this spits out is a series of files, a series of individual image files. So again, here's the model that I was showing you earlier. I've got an individual picture of it. I can actually click through using left to right, or I put this in a PowerPoint presentation and show you these images changing over time. So I've now got a file. You actually see the date goes into the file name at the top, and I can flick through those and show what you want If you didn't want to create a flipbook as such, and you just wanted to get your model to be in the perfect position with the perfect sort of progress shown and the camera in exactly the right place, you can do that. And then you simply press the Save Image button up here, and that will spit out just the individual image that you might want to utilize. Whilst on this menu bar, there's also the option of Save to O2C. O2C is a proprietary modeling format which is highly compressed. If I save an O2C file to my desktop, you can see some examples where I did them in the last webinar. Bridge as of the date there, which is the 14th of April. I export this highly compressed O2C file, but importantly, it's going to export it based on the time that we're currently at. So if I go back into my desktop and show you those, spat out onto the screen, it opens up in what's called the O2C player or viewer. You've got versions of this available for the iPad, and I can have a view of my model, which is fully manipulatable. I can move it and zoom it and all the rest of it, but you'll see it's taken into account the progress that was due at that point in time. And just for reference, in terms of how small these files are, this one's 4 megabytes, so it can easily be included in a email file. The original models sitting behind this are several hundred megabytes, so obviously highly compressed. I did touch on earlier something called a simulation profile, and I didn't really explain that in more detail, so we'll go and talk about that now. A simulation profile is basically saying what happens when this task is performed. And I can create an example profile, and I can give that some properties accessed through the Library Explorer in the way you're normally used to. I can say, for example, that when I've applied this profile, the task is always visible, or it appears at the start of the task, or it disappears at the end of the task. So I can choose what happens. That's how we got those cranes to disappear earlier on. I can choose the color that it flashes as and when it's built. Whilst that task is being worked on, it will show as dark magenta. If it's on time, I can have it being green. If it's late, I can have it being red. So I can use different colors to represent different work. Now, the perfect example of this is when you're working on a part of the model on multiple activities. The example I use here is you're installing a wall. Chances are in the IFC model, that wall is only shown once. But actually that wall is made up of different components and spread across different tasks. You can link that wall to dozens of different tasks and then put a different simulation profile on the activity. So if it's linked to one of the tasks, its build color can be orange. So for example, when we're putting in the original brickwork, the task can go red. Sorry, the model item can go red. A task later on in the project plan might be to come in and plaster that wall. At that point, that same wall can change color. It can go orange to show that plaster is being applied. You get the point. When we're doing first fix, second fix, when we're doing painting, etc., every time we're going back and working on that wall, we can have that color change because it's not being built when you're painting it, but I do need to highlight the work is occurring to it. And that is what the simulation profile is there for. So ultimately, by building up all of these different items within here, by looking at all the different properties and timeline colors and behaviors, that's how we can make sure that our project plan looks as attractive as it can be and represents what it is that we want to show. I can go in here and change the color of the background site. I can go in here and change a predetermined item that I want to have, so that I can change the color of whatever I want to show and show that differently on screen. So Powerproject BIM, lots of different functionality that builds up on the core principle of linking activities so that you can get a more accurate export to it, share it out via the animations, the videos, the flipbooks, the images, and also, as we covered yesterday, saving this off into a read-only file that can then be shown in the project viewer. So on that subject, if I just flip back into the demonstration here, sorry, the screen slides, there is a viewer available for Powerproject, and it does also accept the files that Powerproject BIM reads and exports. So you can share using the viewer a single file that includes the project plan, the baseline, and also the IFCs. And that's free to download and shareable with anybody. So final few comments before we leave. Hopefully today's convinced you that Powerproject BIM is applicable to your project work. If that is true, then you can add it to your existing license of Powerproject. Prices here in the UK, add that to both a single user license, that is to say one that's linked to a single machine, or add it to a pool of concurrent network licenses. You don't need to have a one-to-one mapping though. You can add a single concurrent BIM license into a pool where there are potentially multiple users. We do offer a free 14-day trial, so you can test this. Give us a shout if you want to do that. If you're an existing Powerproject user, we can enable it remotely. If you don't yet use Powerproject, just download the trial from the website and it automatically includes the BIM functionality. And as I mentioned yesterday, we also have a training course available. We run those here in the UK. If you're serviced by Lecosoft UK Limited directly, we run the training courses in London and Haddenham or at your offices. If you're listening to this webinar from outside the UK, contact your local Lecosoft representative, reseller of Powerproject. They'll be able to provide you with pricing in your own local currency, obviously times and training locations that are much more suitable to you, and also support in your own languages. So please contact the appropriate person to get assistance moving forwards. And that's all I was going to say today. So if you do have any more questions for me, please do type them into the panel. I'll do my best to look through those now. Also, when you leave the session today, there will be a feedback form that pops up. Please do complete that, and that gives us a little bit more extra information. So questions come up about the site object IFC files. So yes, we do provide to Powerproject users a number of site object files that you can use as your own. They actually ship within Powerproject. They're available in the installation file of Powerproject. And they are all the ones that say site object. So we give you a tower crane, some example site hoardings, bit of scaffolding, porter cabins, and some example machinery as well. So those are the ones that we give to you for free. You can use those with no problems. Obviously, if you wanted to add your own, and I've downloaded some more ones from the web, there are loads of places you can get these for free on the web. You can add those in instead for your own files. So do go away and grab those yourself. So yeah, hopefully that's answered all your questions today. I hope you found this session of use. Reminder that the recording will be with you later. Please do share that with other people. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.